Good morning, everyone. My name's Fiona Young. I'm clerking the hearing, and I've been asked to deal first with the second item on the agenda, which is the appointment of the chair. And I understand that members would like Councillor Carr to chair the meeting. Is that agreed? Thank you, members.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone, officers, members, those in attendance today, and those watching the webcast at home. Before we start, I'll deal with introductions. I am Councillor David Carr, and I'm chairing today's hearing panel. Councillors Baker and Rawlings are also sitting on this subcommittee with me today. There is also present a Democratic Services Officer, the Monitoring Officer, and Deputy Monitoring Officer present in this meeting. The independent person, David Laverick, is also in attendance. Agenda item 1 concerns declaration of interests. Do members have any interest they wish to declare? No. Thank you. We have dealt with the appointment of chair. Before I move to agenda item 3, I would like to deal with one item of urgent business, and that is under agenda item 5. There is one item of urgent business for this hearing which concerns exclusion of the press and public. I note that the parties have expressed their wishes as part of the pre-hearing procedure in place for the hearing to take place in public. I would support this with the proposal that the press and public be excluded only from any request from the panel for legal advice, the panel's deliberations, and the decision-making at the end of the meeting. Turning now to agenda item 3, public participation. We have 4 members of the public who have registered to speak today. By way of reminder, members of the public may speak at this meeting on the agenda items under consideration today only. The first item, the first public participant is Miss Jill Edwards, and she is joining us by Zoom. Ms. Edwards.
Hello.
Hello, please continue.
Okay, as chair of Kexby and Scorby Parish Council, I've known Mark Waters since he became our ward councillor in 2015. And in reference to this complaint, I am horrified at the accusation that Councillor Waters reputedly said, quote, "It's not my money, so I'm not bothered," unquote. Certainly from my parish council, this is not the Mark Waters we know and is not in character with his position. Councillor Waters, upon attending most of our parish council meetings, continues to push us to spend our ward funding, quite often uses the term, quote, "If you don't use it, you will lose it," unquote. He goes above and beyond the line of duty by not only supporting our schemes, but also helps personally, not only providing certain goods by using his discount privilege, but also pushing the schemes for the VAT recovery and occasionally recommending using private companies to get the job done quicker. On 2 occasions, Mark and myself have installed and planted barrels in the village provided by ward funding at 9 o'clock in the evening, giving up his private time. Does this represent someone who is, quote, "not bothered," unquote? I don't think so. As well as supporting us as a parish council by attending our meetings, his help and advice is very much appreciated. Should we need any urgent help or advice, he responds to any emails or phone calls as soon as he is able. I have never, ever known him to be aggressive or discriminatory, and as a parish council, he has always treated us with respect. I hope, therefore, that you will see that these accusations are, in my opinion, based on my experience of Councillor Waters, completely untrue. Additionally, there appears to be no evidence to support the accusations either. Thank you for your time.
Does that conclude your comments, Ms. Edwards?
It does, yes.
Thank you very much. Your comments have been noted and will be considered at the relevant agenda item.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker, and at this point, I should remind public speakers that they are limited to 3 minutes of comment. Our next speaker is Mr. Peter Broadley, who is joining us by telephone. Mr. Broadley.
Good morning. I'm speaking as chairman of Holtby Parish Council. I've known Mark Waters for over 20 years. The last 6 years, he has had Holtby as part of his ward responsibilities. He's a down-to-earth and hard-working councillor who is popular with local residents. He can be forthright with his views and opinions, but I've never known Mark to be rude or disrespectful to residents. In fact, I would say the opposite, that Mark tends to help people wherever he can and is approachable and hands-on. He has always attended all our parish council meetings and has done whatever we have asked of him. I'm very concerned to see the standards case being brought against our ward councillor and surprised that the investigating officer has allowed what appears to be a petty and trivial complaint to proceed to this far. Having read the paperwork, the complaint appears to be from a disgruntled resident. I'm told that in fact the background of the matter is actually a dispute over the claimant complaints from neighbours about parking. I do not wish to comment on the circumstances, which appear to be simply a case of one person's word against another. There we go. But what I can comment on is Councillor Waters' character and his actions. I have found him to be honest and of good character. I note in particular the reference to Councillor Waters supposedly saying it's not my money. That does not ring true, and it is not the way in which Mark would behave. I have always known him to be very critical with the way the council spends money. Councillor Waters undertakes a lot of unpaid work in Holtby and the rest of the ward. He has been a reliable volunteer and has helped with many projects in Holtby. Ward councillors often act as a buffer between residents and the council and are the first in the firing line when it comes to a complaint. I think it would be a bad thing if the work of the council and councillors can be disrupted by trivial complaints from people who have not really suffered any harm, but who wish to cause mischief simply because the council or their council has done something they dislike. The sensible and common sense way would have been to deal with this complaint would have been for the council to simply have apologised. I do not see that this matter warrants a standards investigation or any further actions. That's the end of my statement. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Broadley. Your comments have been noted and will be considered at the relevant stage. Thank you. Our next thank you. Our next speaker is Mrs. Wendy Maddox, who is joining the meeting by telephone. Mrs. Maddox, can you start your comments, please, and bear in mind that you have a maximum of 3 minutes, please.
Thank you. Yes, good morning. I am Wendy Maddox. I have lived in Oswaldwick for 34 years and been on Oswaldwick Parish Council for over 15 years. I have therefore over those years had hundreds of conversations with Councillor Waters, both in a professional, business and social setting. Based on that experience, I do not recognise the behaviours being alleged in this complaint. There has never been any aggression or disrespect in these conversations on behalf of Councillor Waters, so I do not understand why his behaviour should suddenly change in one unwitnessed phone call and one email. The only aggression I have witnessed in the company of Councillor Waters is that in fact displayed by the complainants, Mr. and Mrs. Moore, during the Oswaldwick Parish Council meeting on the 18th of May 21. They were so aggressive that Councillor Rowley had to request they control their aggressive behaviour. Councillor Waters is very down-to-earth in both speech and writing, but that does not translate into disrespect. The phrase used by Councillor Waters in his email of 2 fingers up is a colloquialism used in this case to express the lack of respect that Mr. and Mrs. Moore have towards other residents of the area, not a lack of respect Councillor Waters has towards them. The complainants say they have good support from neighbours and locals. However, the numbers of residents who turned up to present opposing views to theirs at the parish council meeting would completely contradict this. I find the fact that the council has seen fit to consider this complaint astounding. A complaint emanating from one unwitnessed phone call and an email using a colloquialism is no more than an attempt at character assassination and does not merit the time and money wasted on this hearing. Councillor Waters has always gone beyond the call of duty to make sure that our money on Oswaldwick Parish Council is very carefully spent, getting the best value that he can. So I do not believe he would ever use the phrase, "It is not my money." However, in fact, it is all of our money, and we all have to ensure it is spent wisely. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Maddox. Your comments have been noted and they will be considered at the relevant stage. Thank you indeed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our final speaker this morning is Ms. Gwen Swinburne, who is here in person. And if I may ask her to take a seat at the table and make her comments. And obviously, Ms. Swinburne, you're well aware that there's a 3-minute maximum. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just speaking about the process. Members, this is surreal. You have before you a complaint based solely on a two-way conversation between a constituent and the subject member. There is zero evidence, simply he said, she said, one phone call, no witnesses. The subcommittee has been placed in a dreadful position. You have to decide on a complaint in a public hearing that should have been dismissed by the monitoring officer upon receipt. But members, it gets worse. The monitoring officer in this case, in the case of this particular subject member, studiously avoided any member oversight whatsoever to get to this point. There were 3 such opportunities: an assessment subcommittee to decide whether to investigate, another to review the investigation, and then a pre-hearing opportunity, all rightly behind closed doors. The subject member considers himself defamed. He was offered no written right of reply. His witnesses were not interviewed, and the council, until yesterday at least, refused to publish any witness statements. The subject member has now, on public record, to infinity, accusations he has been denied a chance to fairly defend. Even worse, an additional complaint snuck in after the fact against all natural justice. This is an unacceptable officer pile-on. Only in this case, and one last week, a bungled affair involving a parish chair, have hearings ever been held without member oversight. This is in stark contrast to the 2 complaints against the leader of the council for chairing the Restore Payout meeting. The monitor dismissed both even before investigation, one in just 7 days, using spurious excuses and her own delegations. It's quite clear to me, Chair, that the monitoring officer and her reports are acting partially, disadvantaging this subject member whilst conferring absolute protection for the leader. This is a travesty that you can only partially correct today by dismissing this complaint and demanding a full apology in public from the monitoring officer for a bungled and unfair process against this subject member. I ask that you agree from this moment forth that no investigation and no hearing can be progressed by the monitoring officer without approval from both an assessment sub and a pre-hearing committee. Let's finally stop this unfair, costly and deeply abusive process. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Swinburne. Your comments have been noted and they will be considered at the relevant stage. I just want to pick up on one small reference you made there, and that is the focus of this committee. And this panel is limited, the focus is limited to the complaint by Mr. Moore, namely the telephone conversation which took place between Mr. Moore and Councillor Waters on Saturday, the 28th of November, 2020. Nothing else.
Thank you,
But
Chair.
thank you anyway.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our public participation is now concluded. I will now move on to agenda item 4. And here I want to introduce the various members of this panel. As I've already made clear, I'm Councillor David Carr. I'm the chair of this panel. On my right is
Councillor Stuart Rawlings. This is a joint standards, so I'm the parish council representative on this committee because the remit of the committee covers both parish and City of York councillors.
And on my left.
My name is Councillor Rosie Baker, ward councillor and member of the Joint Standards Committee.
And sitting over there is the monitoring officer.
Good morning, I'm Janie Berry. I'm the Council's Director of Governance and Monitoring Officer.
And the deputy monitoring officer.
Hello, I'm Rachel Antonelli. I'm Head of Democratic Governance and Deputy Monitoring Officer.
At this point, I wish to say that we've received notification that neither the complainant, Mr. Jason Moore, nor the subject councillor, Mr. Mark Waters, are present, but they are represented by Mr. Calfey, is that correct? Would you like to introduce yourself,
yes,
Mr. Calfey?
Mr. Calfey.
And you're representing Mr. Moore?
I am in a capacity of friend.
You are listed as a friend. Can
Yes.
you define what you mean by friend?
A personal friend of both Jason and Kira for a number of years.
Are you a legal representative of
No.
his?
Not at all.
So can I ask in what capacity you're going to speak?
As personal friend of theirs, as they have just returned from annual leave on Sunday evening, and as you can stand for the second day PCR test, they're not able to attend. And
Okay,
as a result, I'm attending as
Okay.
a representative of their personal friend.
okay. I'm coming to that, yes, thank you. And Ms. Swinburne, I think you're listed as a friend of Councillor Waters, are you? But you don't wish to be, you've concluded your
Chair, if we
participation in the
just
meeting.
clarify, Councillor Waters indicated that he'll be asking you to be his friend for the purposes of this morning, so hence the Chair's questioning.
I understand that was the case, but we didn't have a conversation. As you well know, I generally just speak about the process.
Okay, thank you. And our independent person, David, if you would, please.
I'm David Laverick. The council are required by law to appoint one or more people to act as independent persons to advise on the operation of the code of conduct and particularly on individual complaints. So that's my capacity.
Thank you, David. And last but not least, our democracy officer, Fiona.
Fiona Young, Democratic Services Officer.
Okay. And the final comment I want to make about attendance is that the investigating officer, Mr. Gerard Allen, is not able to attend the hearing panel today, but I believe you've all read his report. Can I just ask for confirmation that you have all read his report? Yes?
Yes.
Thank you. Before we go any further, I would like to outline some of the administrative matters the panel have agreed in relation to this hearing. First, in accordance with the hearing procedures, the panel have met privately to review the material presented relevant to the hearing. We have agreed, as I've just said, that the panel will focus solely on the telephone conversation, which took place between Mr. Moore and Councillor Waters on Saturday, the 28th of November, 2020. Any extraneous matters, any background, any events leading up to that phone call or post that phone call will not be taken into account in this hearing. Secondly, both parties have indicated they wish to have a representative present with them. Clearly, they're not present today. The subject councillor and the complainant are not here in person today. The complainant has requested Mr. Calfey be his representative. or friend, and has specified that he is in fact acting in capacity of friend, correct? And I think we've dealt with the issue of Councillor Waters and the representation or otherwise of Miss Swinburne. Yes, okay, thank you. Thirdly, Councillor Waters wished to call witnesses to give written evidence with the exception of Mr. Harrison. The panel have considered this request and have received email correspondence from some of those people named in Councillor Waters' request. These emails are being passed on to complainants in order that they have the opportunity to consider them. As the main focus of the hearing is limited to the phone call, then the panel do not intend to hear from any other witnesses other than the parties to the telephone call, and in this case, that's clearly no one. The panel will consider the written report of the investigating officer and will not hear evidence from him. The panel will record that the facts in dispute are limited solely to the telephone conversation which took place on Saturday, the 28th of November 2020, between Councillor Waters and Mr. Moore. So I suppose at this point, Mr. Calfey, you might want to make some comments in relation to your friendship with Mr. Moore and how that has a bearing on the focus of the hearing's deliberations. Councillor Baker. Councillor Baker would like to adjourn the meeting, please. Thank you, Mr. Calfee and Ms. Swinburne for withdrawing from the meeting. We just had to clarify a point about the hearing. Right, Mr. Calfee, if you would like to speak, there have been speakers in support of Councillor Waters. You're the sole person here in support of Councillor Moore. Whether as friend or representative, I would like your opinion on what you mean by friend in this context. But please, the floor is yours. And clearly, I'd like to limit you to 3 minutes if that could be arranged.
So before we start the 3 minutes, can I just clarify the friend position so it's absolutely clear?
You'll have to speak up.
Sorry,
I can't hear you very well at all.
One of the questions you just asked is to clarify the friend's position. I don't want to eat that into the 3 minute allowance, if that makes sense, because it's a question you've asked from myself to clarify. So as a preliminary, if it's okay with the committee, just to clarify that friend position, so there's absolutely no confusion or any doubt of the position I am and what my role is. And I'll make it absolutely clear. I've known Jason and Kira for a number of years, quite a long time. And throughout this, I've just been in a friend capacity, nothing more than that, to the level where I've taken annual leave off today to be here as a friend capacity, nothing more than that. Jason and Kira would be here themselves, but they've just got back from abroad on Sunday night. And I'm sure you'd agree it's not wise for them to purely be here in the current situation, and it's in the current position right now. So hence why they've asked me to just come here as a pure friend representative to assist and to take communications, answer questions on their behalf, nothing more than that. Yes, I have a legal background. Yes, I am qualified in that area, but that is aside. I'm not wearing that cap today in any capacity. My capacity today is as a pure friend, and I hope that clarifies the position and gives you and the committee and the participants the assurance that I'm in a capacity as a friend today. If you have any questions about that, please fire away. I'd certainly do.
Well, we'll probably take questions at the end, but please continue.
Certainly. Okay. Now, this committee's asked to look at the position of the telephone call which took place on Saturday, 28th of November. And it's narrowed it down to that, just that phone call and not the historic matters between the parties, which have been occurred. And as Councillor Walters said, it's been a long-standing matter. He's been appointment in 2011. As he states, it's an issue which is ongoing. But we're here to focus on the telephone call. It's accepted there was no other parties on a telephone call. It is accepted that the call was not recorded. And if it was recorded, I would expect people to just say, it is recorded, so people know that it's being recorded. What the investigating officer has looked at the call is the contents of an email and how that email bases the contents of the call. And the email is contained on page 19. And on that email, I point out 3 key lines. Simply stick up 2 fingers up to the residents in that area. Is anyone going to take action? My advice to the residents will be to park their cars on the road to prevent the maneuvers. Throughout those 3 lines, and even though that email was not sent to Mr. and Mrs. Moore, who were not part of that, it is still important to consider that in light of the tones between the parties completely. It's also interesting to note that the monitoring officer accepted the findings of the report, sought the view of Councillor Walters, and asked whether he would offer an apology, which he was not prepared to do. That could have resolved the issues, an apology. And that, if there's any miscommunications, an apology could have resolved it from both parties. And that could have been a resolution. But you can only shake a hand if both parties are prepared to shake the hand, not if one party is prepared to shake it and the other party is refusing. How is that discourteous? How is that respectful in the matter? You've read the report by the investigating officer, You are fully aware of the noting procedures, you're fully aware of the code of conduct, all this is in the report itself, and you're fully aware of section 3, subsection 1 of that. I'm not going to talk about the position and the background. That is not relevant. All I'm going to make comment is a resolution needs to be found and move forward. That's all I'd like to put forward to the committee, and I'll leave it for themselves.
Thank you, Mr. Calfay. I think that concludes all the statements now in support of both Councillor Waters and the complainant. The panel will now commence deliberations in private before announcing in public their findings and reasons. If, after considering all of the evidence, the panel finds that Councillor Waters has breached the code of conduct, we will invite representations from the parties as to what action, if any, should be taken. The panel will deliberate any sanction in private and will then publicly announce that decision. Written notice of the findings will then be issued. Before we actually withdraw, are there any questions that my members to my right and left would like to ask Mr. Calfay? Rosie, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Mr. Calfay. It's good to hear from you. You state that, quite rightly, we as a panel have not decided to look into any historic matters relating to either party. So my question is, can you explain why it is that in the complaint received from Mr. and Mrs. Moore, it states that they had no dealings with Councillor Waters in the past, when it seems to me that perhaps if there were historic matters, they might well have had dealings with him in the past?
In the email from Councillor Waters, he states that he's had a long matter since 2011 since been appointed regarding the previous owners, the GPs, and parking situation. I do question one thing there. Has this situation stemmed from the previous owners to the new owners, Jason and Kira, who when they acquired the foot clinic? Surely a resolution would have been to come and speak to Jason and Kira and see what solution can be found to resolve things, because obviously if there was a problem, they could resolve things, but there's been no communication. When the when the fencing went up, at that time, they approached both councillors, ward councillors in that area.
So as far as you're aware, Mr. and Mrs. Moore have had dealings with Councillor Waters in the past, before this complaint?
Not before this complaint.
Right, okay, thank you.
Councillor Rawlings.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much for your time today, and thanks for coming along. You put a very articulate case across, which is appreciated. Just want to come back to a couple of comments just to reiterate what you said, really. You are content, and the claimant is content, that there is no witness to the telephone conversation. So the actual dispute over the complaint is not debated on your party's side.
What I've read in the investigator's officer's report is, and has been stated by Jason Kira, is, and accepted by Councillor Walters, is that there was no other participants in that phone call, and there was no recordings of that phone call, which does narrow it down. But then that's when the next question the investigating officer looked at was that email and the tone of the email pursuant to the phone call, and said, look, if this is the tone of the email, this could have been said as the same tone on the phone call. That's why the email is important and is part of this. The investigating officer accepts it's part of the complaint and bought into the complaint, because at the time, I think the correspondence went out, that email was not available. Jason and Kieran never saw that email, never had sight of that email. They never were part of that email. That email only came back after a request, and they found out about this email. It came in a chain of emails, nothing more than that. But that's what the investigating officer goes down the lines of and says, look, the tone of the email, if that's from the phone call, then that is where the breach is of the code of conduct under section 3, subsection 1. Is it respectful? And that's what it comes down to.
Thank you, Councillor Rawlings and Mr. Carthy. Right, now the subcommittee is going to withdraw to consider its decision. Let me just reiterate that the subcommittee's sole focus in this complaint is limited to the conversation, the telephone conversation, which took place between Mr. Moore and Councillor Waters on Saturday, the 28th of November 2020. Thank you for your attendance. I think we now go into private session. The monitoring officers, the independent person, the democracy officer, and obviously the members will remain in the room. May I thank Ms. Swinburne and Mr. Calfee for their attendance. Thank you very much indeed. Welcome back. This is the panel's announcement of findings. So welcome to all and thank you for your patience while the committee has been finishing its deliberations. The conclusion of the panel is as follows. In the absence of both the subject member and the complainant at this hearing, it has proved impossible to hear direct evidence as to the conduct, manner, and tone of the telephone call in question. In the absence of any other relevant evidence being brought to the panel's attention, it has not, in our opinion, been possible to make a direct link between the telephone conversation and the email in the investigating officer's report. That email does not, in the panel's opinion, cast sufficient light on the conduct or tone of the subject or relevant telephone conversation. There is no evidence presented to the panel that there has been a breach of the code of conduct. The panel reminds itself that the only witnesses to the telephone call were the complainant, Mr. Moore, and the subject member, Councillor Waters. In the absence of any evidence, it has not been possible for the panel to determine whether or not Councillor Waters breached the code of conduct. Therefore, the panel has decided to dismiss the complaint. As to sanctions, there will be no sanctions applied due to the complaint being dismissed. The panel has completed the detailed decision notice, and this will be published on the City Council's website shortly. This brings the hearing to a close, and I would like to thank everyone who has participated in this process. The hearing is now closed. Thank you.